All right. Welcome to the Express TC meeting for October 5th. Here in attendance currently, we have Blake, Linus, and Rand, and myself, Douglas. We have a couple agenda items marked down just to go over. So first one, we'll talk about discussing the Readme translation issue that was brought up by Linus. We want to discuss the thing about XPowerX. I just realized Yappa's not here, but whatever. Which was also brought up by Linus.
I was going to say, Yappa said he had to take his kid to the hospital, so he gave me a couple of inputs.
Sorry, I didn't mean it as a problem. I was actually just surprised because for some reason I thought he was here, and then when I looked down at the list, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Surprised that my weird expectations weren't met. It was all my bad.
He told me he gave me some
cool
some input to pass on when we get to the
yep.
issues. Sorry.
And of course, he wrote down things on some of the issues too, which is really awesome because we obviously we'll be able to read that, and so hopefully should be able to represent anything he thought of. And even then, usually anything we say from here is not like either. So like he can always watch the meeting, or we can write down things and he can read it and then react to anything. So we're not gonna. It's not being here. It's certainly not a lockout. So then we wanted to discuss behavior that the router does that was brought up by the by an outside collaborator that there was an issue on by Brian White. And yeah, so then anything else that comes up. So let's, I guess, take it away, Linus. You need to give a little history about what the translated README stuff is about, and then we can discuss from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started with me getting a pull request to the Motor project with the translation of the README into Chinese. And the thing I wanted to bring up is basically how, if we have any processes for keeping it up to date, or basically how we should do with translated READMEs in general.
Cool. Yeah, so in this there's an issue in the discussions thread, which is number 38, and we'll put a link below the video. But basically, yeah, so we had a little bit of discussion in the issue previously, certainly wanted to touch on it a little bit. So that was kind of like there. I mean, I'll share my opinion that I had, which is really I don't really particularly care. I do know that because the main issue I feel like is like it's actually really awesome because things like Google Translator, which Rand also thought was like it's not the greatest, especially at technical documentation. So certainly having a translator, even if having something translated probably reads a lot easier, for a native speaker. I mean, it'd be the same as probably if I was reading something translated from another language in English, especially technical documentation. I'd be like, what the heck is that really saying? I'd have to certainly rely a lot more on the examples to figure that out. So I think the issue was just also like, what do we do in this kind of case, just as a generalness for like just different modules in Express. So the Express.js.com website isn't really what the question is about anyway, since we already have translations for that, and a lot of that were professionally translated. Whether or not that's ongoing, I'm not 100% sure. I think it is. Rand will be able to speak to that. Is that ongoing?
No, it's not. It was kind of a one-time deal.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just curious was all.
Yeah. It's just. I mean, it's possible we may be able to get some incremental work done, but it's not. There's no guarantees at all.
Yep. Awesome. I was just curious was also. So basically, like, yeah, so I mean, it's kind of similar problems, right? So like if you say, especially like a module, so one, it's actually kind of easier if the module doesn't really change too much, over time, because, then the translation won't get very much out of date. So I think the main problem is just how do you deal with it? One, where do I put the translation? So especially as.com website you can go to different languages. The whole site's like segmented by language. But like on a little project, like what do you do? Do you put both languages in the same README? Do you make separate READMEs where the English is just the README file extension and the other ones are like README language file extension or README language file extension, something like that, and then put links to the lower languages in the main README. I also feel like a subset of that is like, because by default NPM will package the main README in with your package. So I think like a side sheet of that is like, should you then also include the other language READMEs in the actual NPM package, or just the main README that it does by default? And I don't even think there's a way you can turn that off anyways. The main README. So that's kind of like a question I think about. And yeah, how do you keep it up to date too? Like, do you, like, as far as up to date, you only have a few options. Either say, yeah, awesome, I love that you translated it, but we're not going to accept it because there's no way for us to maintain it. That's one way. Another way is that you just put up a warning in English, or tell them to put it in the language, and you can just ask them to put it in the language at the top. Basically, be like, it was translated by the community that the maintainers don't actually keep this up to date without knowledge of the language. So feel free to make pull requests to update it to match any changes in the main README. Obviously, examples, like, unless where there's not a lot of words explaining it, like, you could change the example without knowing the language, or if the example still has the same explanation but you just tweaked it for an API change, we can obviously maintain that. So those are all different things, I guess. And then there's also the question of, that I think of is like, if you have one, one that just no one ever comes back and does a PR to update that, does that start to become more of a burden, and then you want to remove it, especially if you have to do a major API change, or not? And actually, that could be a good thing I just thought of, is like maybe what we could do even like around that area is ask the person, like when they do the pull request, they could put it as an HTML comment in the README at the bottom or something, so that way we have it, but can like ask them that, or just in a pull request as like text, so we can go back later and copy and paste it and say, ask them to write like a little wording that says, that we could put at the top later, it says like, this is for an old API version. If you can translate, is for the previous major or some stuff like that, you know what I mean? So that way, if we do release a new major and the docs have to be rewritten a lot, but we can't because it's not in the language we speak, kind of like a way to indicate that, that makes sense. Obviously, we can run that through Google Translator if we really have to. So, I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it. I think, so besides my thoughts, to give my initial opinion is that probably without enough really information, all this just kind of like just thoughts and, in my own mind without a lot of experience with it. I mean, at this point, I say, I guess we'll just, pull it in, just have a README with a different name for that language and just see how it works out, is all I can really think of. So I'll let someone else take the floor from here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just, Ren had some really good comments that I think commented in the pull request as well, and I feel that it's ready for merging, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's worthwhile, even though there's some chance that things could get outdated. You just like you say, you just put a disclaimer in there and say it was written for this version, and it may be outdated. So and that's about the best you can do. I think, and in my opinion, it's better to do that than to have no translation whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I would suggest is once this pull request lands, you may want to update the English README and just say, this is also available in Chinese, and then link to that new.
I think
Right.
a link to the translated README was included in the English README in the pull request as well, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Yeah, well, that's good then, because.
Yep. And did they make the link in English or in Chinese?
It's one part that says English that's not a link in the English README, but is a link in the translated README, and then there's another link with, I guess, the name of the language in that language.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I was curious about, because that would be probably awesome to have that. I mean, I'm sure we could easily Google Translate that, but cool. I'm glad they did that, because so if you ever looked, so there's there's been a tiny bit of history, I guess, with Express itself, and I'm trying to see if this is on the README still. So there's Express being fairly popular. There are a few, so there's the only one left right now is the Russian one. So there's a section in the Express main README that is basically like, oh yes, here's this person made a Korean translation of the whole website, right? So there's a repo, so they just cloned the website repo and they actually just put it up themselves. So it was also a little different, while a README we're kind of like self-hosting it rather than like just pointing somewhere else. It's a little different in that regard, but still kind of similar, right? And so we just put like, here's the Korean documentation or whatever in Korean, and so, it's like the Russian documentation in Russian or whatever, and points to that. So cool. I'm sure people find it useful.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, any other thoughts? Blake, do you have any thoughts on this topic, or not too much? Okay, he said he's good. Cool. All right, so I guess what we will do, so just make sure that we have an actual takeaway, from at least the meeting, right? So that way we can write it down in there. So I think the takeaway is, let's just go ahead and accept it. We'll probably want to call it, because we'll probably want some consistency, especially if other repos do it. I'm impartial. My thought is either the word README and then like dash the language code .md or dot the language code .md. I don't really care if it's dash or dot personally, but you should probably just, whichever one you do or whatever, probably just go and write it down. We'll just copy that then. That way they'll be similar. So if we accept them in others, that way it also gives people a consistent way. It's like, oh yeah, look for that. I don't know if there's other projects that do this. So if there's other projects that do this, then we could just copy whatever their file name is. But my thought is that they're probably using language code before the MD and after the word README or something is probably what I suspect.
Yeah, that's how it is in the pull request. And it's also in a doc subfolder, which I think is kind of nice, especially if you would have a lot of translations. It would be nice keeping them out of the root folder.
Oh, so you're even saying like, so they put a copy of the README, but in the docs folder?
So the English README is still...
right, yeah.
But the translated README lives in doc/readme-language-code.md.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, that's... we could, of course, just ask
right.
that changed if you wanted in some other...
Yeah, I mean, we can always move it around if we want to, but that sounds good enough. Yeah. So, cool. And that's why I said, like, what we'll do is pull it in and you can just note it in that thing. That way, when we do it on other repos, we can just do it the same way. And if there ever is strong opinion to change that, we can talk about it and just change it. But that way, if we do have it on others, we can just accept it in the same manner. So that way, we kind of like, they're all kind of similar instead of just, because it's like one of those things, it's like a bike setting system. It's like, where exactly do you put it, blah, blah, blah. And if they all look different, then it's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, takeaway is, yep, we'll merge it, and then you'll just write down kind of like what the style kind of was, and then we'll probably just close that out as just saying, yep, we'll just go forward with that. Cool.
Yeah, sounds good.
So the next one, also brought up by Linus, is a question. He asked a question for discussion topic. How do we feel about the XPowered response header from Express? So this is certainly a controversial header. Everybody has opinions about it. I didn't actually comment on that issue, as you probably noticed, mainly because I was been really busy this week, but also I noticed that you linked back to another discussion I'd had, and this was before the TC existed, right? So just, of course, take my thoughts on it haven't really changed, so I didn't really have anything to add beyond that. But of course, that issue that you had was like anything you read there obviously was final decision, since there's no TC kind of thing, so whatever. What we'll do with it now, absolutely. The one thing I would have commented, and I know that I felt like we were going to do it anyways, was that we should absolutely revisit it, right? Just because when there wasn't a TC and I said, yeah, absolutely keep it, doesn't mean that's law. So we're absolutely free to discuss as many times as we feel like, and whatever we feel comfortable with in going forward. So just as a general thing. So for everybody who doesn't know, so Express, by default, so Express has various settings and things, and certain settings are defaults. Default has different behaviors and stuff, and so one of the default settings is that every response that you send using specifically the Express sugar methods, so that is using .send, .send status, .json, .jsonp, etc. If you use .write and .end, or you pipe into the res yourself, this behavior does not actually apply. So, sorry, I was actually thinking completely different. No, this is always on everything. So I forgot it's an implicit middleware added at the top. I don't know why I was thinking something else, but yes, it's implicit. It's added on every response, even if you manually respond and pipe things in. So every response Express will send, there'll be a added response header called XPowered. It is not a standard header. It's kind of like just a de facto unstandardized header. Its value is the word Express. So the purpose of this header, just in general, is that typically you have a standard HTTP header called server. So the idea was there's a response header called server. You're supposed to put supposed to, ignoring any conversation that'll come up, I'm just talking about what these are meant for, is that there's going to be a server response header that signals what server software you're running, potentially what version of that software you're running. And then that would be like classic examples would be Internet Information Services, Apache, Nginx, Lite, things like that. Then there's a de facto unstandardized header called XPowered that you would put you'd basically advertise the application level stack that it's running. So for example, it might say ASP.NET, PHP, things like that. Even Django, whatever it felt like. So in this case, Express will add the word Express there. So Express doesn't add a server header because Express isn't really technically the server. It should actually say like Node.js if a server header were there. We do not add that because that's not our concern. But we do have the singular word Express. So the question was, how do we feel about it existing, right? So a little bit of history too is that no one on the TC ever added it. It's actually been around for pretty much mostly as long as Express has existed, and was actually added by the original author, TJ. Motives unknown, just as a bit of history. It has been brought up. I have historically said I don't see a problem with it. But yeah, so I guess we'll let Linus, take over here and put out his thoughts on here. I know he has it written out in the issue, which I will link to below, issue number 39. That we'll have him just kind of like go over like what his motive for asking the question is to kind of prime us on any conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, so I actually I was reviewing our security best practices pages on the Express website, and it puts quite a lot of emphasis on that you should go and you should disable the header. That it's I think it says at minimum disable XPowerX header. If you don't, and then it talks about if you're not using Helmet, at least the least you should do is go and disable this header. And I think that it feels kind of mixed to have in our security guidelines having a recommendation saying you should really turn off this feature, and then we have the feature on by default. So when I raised the issue, I was mostly thinking about that I would either like to see the best practice guidelines reviewed and maybe remove the mentioning of disabling the header, or to have the header not enabled by default. It seems like we are sending mixed signals when we are adding a thing which we are also telling is dangerous on our website. But yeah, that was just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think this document came about quite a while back based on, I mean, I actually wrote it, but it was based on work that a bunch of different people did, you know, a bunch of the engineers in Strong Loop, and I think I also looked at a bunch of other just articles that are out there. And, you know, I mean, I think, you know, part of it was, I mean, a lot of people seem to like Helmet, and that's one of the things Helmet does, is it, you know, disables the XPowerX. I'm, you know, and so I read what Doug wrote in his comment in that one other issue, you know, basically saying that it doesn't really, it doesn't provide any, you know, disabling the header doesn't provide any guarantees. It just gives you a little bit more obscurity. So I think my, I mean, and I'm certainly no expert by any means, but I guess I would say rather than tell people not to, you know, rather than, you know, removing the recommendation to remove it or to disable the header altogether, maybe we should just put a note in there saying, yeah, disabling it will just, you know, we'll just obscure it. It won't necessarily make it impossible for people to discover that you're using Express. And it will just maybe discourage sort of casual exploits or something like that. I don't know. It seems like if we took out that recommendation altogether, then a naive user might not know that. I mean, in my mind, it seems like there is a certain amount of benefit, just, you know, as I said, to discourage sort of, you know,
right,
as Yapa put it, you know, drive-by hackers or whatever.
Yeah. So, and do you pasted what Yapa's input was since he's not here?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to mention it out loud here real quick.
Sure, I can read it. Yeah, he said, I'd like to keep the XPowerX header, but show the way to disable it for those who want to disable it for whatever reason. Apache HTTPD does the same thing. And, you know, we definitely do document how to disable it. So that he's basically saying that he doesn't want to change anything, which is fine. Although I think it might be worth, you know, noting what, you know, what, like I said, what Doug said is that, you know, disabling it doesn't really guarantee you anything. It's just sort of a precaution. It's kind of like, you know, maybe, you know, locking your front door. That doesn't mean that no one's going to be able to, you know, steal from your house because they can just break a window. But it just means they can't casually open the door and walk in and steal your TV or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Though, of course, just for those listening, right, the XPowerX is not exactly analogous to not locking your doors. I guess it's more of like not putting a sign that says "house is here."
Yeah.
So I guess that it's still not. I'm just trying to grasp for something physically analogous. I'm trying to just think about it. It's closer, but not quite still. But yeah, so I guess I'll jump into a little bit of my opinion here. So ultimately, right, so if I were to say globally, what is my opinion? If I were to give an actual honest opinion, is I don't care. It's a stupid bike shed topic. You know, but so that was just as a primer, right? So like, obviously, so you say like, oh well, why is it there in the first place, and should you just remove it? Blah blah blah. So here's like my main thoughts, right? Is that the biggest reason that I was like, and kind of like, don't really want to just remove it is that a lot. I guess it's just like my frame of mind, right? Like a lot of times it's like, removing it without an actual valid reason is just like changing anything without a valid reason, right? It's just one of those things, just like any bike shed topic, right? It's like, it's just it can keep flipping back and forth, and everybody's right and everybody's not right, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So like the common reasons I hear for removal is, oh, you can, if you don't say, so I guess real quick here too is like, it literally is just the word Express. It is not what version of Express or anything else about operating system, other things like that. So the most common excuse I hear is like, well, if you don't put that header, then people won't know they're running Express, so they won't be able to exploit you, or that they might not realize they can exploit you. So that's almost like a non-argument. It's, you know, it comes about from, as what you would say, security red herrings, I guess, and someone actually used that word, so I just picked it up. It was in our comments. But it's one of those things where it's just like, you know, someone says do this, so they're going to flag it down because it's an easy thing, right? So I don't know if you've ever like done SEO or other of those website analysis programs against your website, and will flag all this crap. Some things you're just not going to change. Like, I just did Google's page speed recently, and they're like, inline your CSS as inline CSS on your page. And I'm just like, no, I'm just not going to do that. Like, sure, I guess I could, and it would save a CSS file lookup. But, you know, that's just picking brains. Next thing you know, you're running against some other software that says, why are you inlining CSS? Take it out of your page. So, super annoying. It's really like your personal opinion, but so the biggest thing I feel like with Driveby Argument is that if you think about Express, right, it's a web server. So if I think about, okay, thinking back and I looked at what are the actual security like vulnerabilities that were actually like specified in the past against Express. So we have a security page and it lists what they are. So the most recent one was that if you were using a certain API in your app, right? So therefore, you already have to be using a certain API in your app. So just the fact that using Express or not doesn't even guarantee that the app is vulnerable in the first place. But then it was that all you needed was an accept header that had certain properties, and it would make the event loop block for a long time. So you can think of a tool. So a lot of these hackers kind of thing, I guess you could say, like, you know, script kiddies, as they would like to be called. A lot of times they literally just use pen testing tools and stuff against things that are not theirs. Like Metasploit is a pretty good, awesome one. And they just go and they have rules in there, right? So any tool can just have a rule where it's just like, make a request with that accept header. Make it without that accept header. Did it take a really long time with the accept header? Then it's vulnerable, right? You didn't have to care if it had the word Express in it. In fact, any actual attacker would figure that any properly, essentially quote properly secured site isn't advertising what their software stack is. Therefore, you wouldn't even use that in the first place. So a lot of the exploits that would usually be, so I'm not saying everyone, right? So just looking back at our own history, a lot of the exploits you can easily probe. And if anybody who's run a website usually will see their access log, and every so often they'll see a big blast of things in their access log. It's like accessing like a bunch of URLs that will say like PHP myadmin and things like that, right? Like they didn't go and say, oh, let's make a request to the homepage. Oh, does it say it's running PHP oh, it doesn't, we're not going to check if PHP my admin is there, right? I mean, they don't care. They're just going to try the exploit regardless. And if it works great. If it doesn't, I guess oh well. So a lot of things will do that. Obviously, you can be sneakier and look for that stuff before you try it if you don't want to trip any wire alarms or anything like that. But still, that's the general, I feel like, sentiment against removing it, just as a general concept of security. Now, I do absolutely agree. Pretty much everywhere you look in security books, they will tell you to turn that off. And the number one reason to turn that off is that people don't upgrade software a lot of time, right? So if you have that broadcasting there, it can end up being a little trivial to just be like, oh, look at these old things running ancient Apaches or whatever. It's just maybe there's a known vulnerability and exploit it, and I guess you could do that, but I mean, you could also just scan the Apache anyways, each server, and just look for the Apache vulnerability. Especially people looking to exploit Express, a lot of time, most configurations, because they're running in app containers like Heroku, like Node.js isn't on the edge of the internet. It's behind like a reverse proxy. Some reverse proxies actually automatically scrape those headers out anyways, just, because that's the, quote, best practice, so they'll scrape it out. That doesn't make your app any less exploitable against any past or potential future vulnerability. But yeah, so that's just all my thoughts. My thoughts on, you say, well, you have a lot of thoughts on why you shouldn't remove it, but it's all about not hearing a good argument for removal. And you said you didn't care, so it's like, why would you just not remove it then, right? And stop getting issues of people saying like, why do we have it, blah, blah, blah. So on the other side, I had thought about it a lot, and there's an issue that, anybody can read to go see my full thoughts, but I thought to myself, I'm like, well, so you say, well, what's the argument for keeping it, right? So in my mind, the argument for even having it in the first place, you could almost think of as, and I know this is obviously absolutely opinionated, right? So I'm not saying this is actual fact-based at all, but you can almost think of it almost like as a kind of like almost like a contribution back to Express, right? It's basically like, by default, people will just essentially say, look, Express, right? Does Express need that? Not particularly. It's pretty much an ubiquitous go-to server, so does it need that? No, probably not, right? Who does it really benefit? No one. Do I personally ever look at statistics about anyone finding stats for Express? Nope, I do not care. So you might say, oh, well, who cares then? Obviously, there might be people out there who use, there are some sites that can actually, they just scrape the web constantly and, report the server and XPowerX headers as metrics, similar to, if you look at Stats Counter, which counts how much, from participating websites of user agents and their versions and things to understand the popularity of a certain web browser. So, there are those systems. Whether or not it, personally, just because I don't check doesn't mean, you don't have those crazy people who are like, oh, well, Express didn't show up, so it's not there. But obviously, it's like, well, we want it to show up anyways. So, I mean, I don't really care about that really too much either. But, some people say, well, it's annoying that I have to turn it off if I want to meet whatever. So some part of me says the effort to paste one line you have to turn off is your payment for the free software. It's completely irrational. I know. I'm just saying things out there. Just to maybe it makes sense to some people just to say it. But yeah, so then if you want to circle around on what my opinion is about the documentation, right? So that was what kind of brought it up. If we don't remove it, and if it stays on the default, then why would we publish almost like conflicting documentation saying when you use Express, turn off this feature. And I mean, I could see it both ways. It can somewhat sound like mixed signals. I mean, though, if we are sending that header and if any person and I say this on purpose, thinks that they're a security expert, whether or not they're not, right? There are people who think that they're security experts and think people who know that they're not, and then people who actually are. A lot of the issues get filed by, I guess, think experience experts. I mean, I guess that's a pessimistic way to look at it. I guess the way to look at it is aspiring security experts, right? So they're doing it because they probably want to be a security expert, right? So probably it's like seeing an article on Express itself, like saying not to turn that off when like one of those stupid, simple like instructions just turn off that crap. It's kind of weird, it would seem weird that, it definitely, you'd probably get pull requests to add that back anyways. So, I mean, it's just one of those things that's kind of weird and annoying. So the other thing, just as a general before, I'll let someone else take the floor here, but I just want to finish off here on my talk here on that. I feel like this is also one of those hard things, just running a project that so many people see day to day, right, is the people who don't care don't comment, and the people who don't like it comment, right? So it's hard to even know how much, surprisingly, two people commented on the discussions. So that means they're actually probably subscribed to this discussions repo, which is actually pretty cool. And unfortunately, you can't tell still, right? Only 2 is not a great sample, and 1 was for it and 1 was against it. And the for it person actually wrote a lot more substance than the one against it, who just wrote the I'm against it, basically. Didn't really say any good reasons. I'm against it for the securities, basically, is, I would say, the theme. So, I mean, I understand that they probably had a reason. It wasn't articulated, right? So I'm not criticizing that it wasn't articulated. It's just hard to understand, right? And as a project, running a project, it's always hard to sometimes it can be hard just to step back and just be like, okay, that's why you'll see my other comments and why I kind of like want to hear like a good reason, just because without a good reason, sometimes you end up flipping back and forth. You turn something off and then people come and say like, well, I was using that and that was a good feature, and you're like, oh, dang it. Like now I'm in really more of a pickle than if I just sat this through, so it's hard to know. And so that's why we're talking about it as a TC, right? And we don't have to come to a decision today, but just, we do absolutely want to talk about it with everyone. So I just wanted to just kind of say that before I let someone else come talk, Blake or Linus. Blake hasn't said much so far, so I don't know if he's waiting for the last topic or wanted to participate in this one. Any verbiage?
Mostly just waiting, but yeah, either way, it's technically, I guess, a breaking change. I don't see any reason to get rid of it. It's cool to like show some appreciation back to the authors. There's a lot of people that aren't running enterprise software. If you are, then you can just disable it or whatever. If it's just a small project, I don't think it's a big deal to have it there. No one is going to go in and go like, let's purposely add this middleware that adds this XPowered by header. That's just never going to happen. So I think it's pretty common to have attribution.
Right.
I don't see any reason to kill it.
Yeah, and I guess on that vein, just real quick, I did double check earlier this week just to make sure everybody's still doing it. Literally, as far as I can tell, every stack does this. Apache sends it by default. Apparently, you used to never be able to actually fully disable the server header without a patch. I think that might be different now. But Apache sends that by default. I didn't confirm Nginx, but I think it does by default. PHP sends that by default. ASP sends by default. Everything that I actually did confirm, send it by default. I didn't look up everything, but all the ones I did look at, which was just whatever I just happened to look at. I wasn't just looking for which ones did it. I went to their websites directly and looked at their docs. Did it by default. So, I mean, at the same time, it's like, do they deflect the same kind of criticism all the time or not? I don't know. And one of the hard things, especially with such a small group, right? And I would go as far to say none of us are specifically a server expert, right? When, it's hard for us not to look up to the servers that have existed forever and say, wait, why would we go a different route? Like, if they're sitting here still doing this, it seems a little odd. And this is what goes through my mind, right? Like, I know they have legacy and stuff, but like something like that, I'm sure they could change, right? If it really did matter, they would change it by now, you'd think. Especially they have way more eyeballs on those things, like people scrutinizing the crap out of it than probably on us. So that's just some of my additional thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess, I think it sounds entirely reasonable to keep it the way it is. My main question from the doc perspective is, and I would be, again, I'd be a little uncomfortable like removing the recommendation that we have in there to disable it, for like, is this, again, it's a sort of like, well, from a security standpoint, you're not losing anything by disabling it, but my question is, should we put something in there saying, hey, this doesn't necessarily really, guarantee anything, but it's just I don't know.
So Apache had documentation on their thing, and I think they did say something like that. Like, yeah, you can turn it down, but it doesn't save you anything. So, so I think that if we want to do takeaways before we switch to the next topic, I guess, because a lot of this was a discussion, I think that the takeaways are, should we, or, as we feel inclined, go look over the security document? Sure, why not? Should we, if we think that there's any suggestions, should we go and just open up an issue, probably on the Express site, with what our specific suggestion is? Sure. And then we can certainly talk about any specifics, especially now we kind of like talked a little bit. I feel like there wasn't really, let me know if I'm wrong, but I feel like there wasn't too much consensus on the actual topic itself, besides like, I don't know, I guess let's not do much. Obviously, the security document itself, like, should we audit that and just look over it and put our opinions down? Yeah, sure. Sounds fine. Separate issue, really, than the actual XPowerX. So, we could always certainly, what I'll do is I'll try to put some more information in that ticket, and we can certainly continue that discussion until we feel satisfied that there is nothing to do or that there is something to do. So I guess additional topic I would say is, we talked about it. There's that discussion issue. If anyone here so far thinks that, especially any strongly, that it should be removed, as in make a change, please write it in that issue. So that way we know that they're actually, just to kind of like track it down, like, so we don't, so say like Linus, if you still really felt like needed to be removed, right? I don't want to lose that. I don't want to make it seem like we all said, sure, sounds like no consensus, so let's just close it. So go, if you do, this is just an example, certainly go right down like, yeah, so after the TC meeting, I think I think that we should seriously consider removing it. That way we say, okay, we know that you think strongly and that, about removing it. So that way we understand that, so we can make sure that we don't just let the issue fall off the side of the earth or something.
Personally for me, I opened the issue really to change the documentation. So I'm not actually, I don't think we should remove the header. So.
Right. Yep. I didn't know. I thought that's what it was, but I was using it as an example. That way, sometimes it can be hard in these things where it's kind of like wishy-washy, and we don't really come to like a quote action item, to actually do. So, and I don't want to end up closing a discussion when we feel like it wasn't. Obviously, since discussion, I would always say a person who opened the discussion has absolute authority to close their own discussion. So if Linus closes the discussion, heck, that's fine. If someone else wants to open it again, that's fine too. So if you feel like you're satisfied enough, close the discussion, then that's a really easy way to do that. I mean, that's an easy way to work. So otherwise, yeah, so cool. Unless anybody else had, and then I don't, probably just want to move on to the last item because Blake has been waiting here, and we're coming up to an hour long anyways, so and we only have 3 items, good. I knew that this XPowerX thing would take a while, so this other items might take a while, might not, who knows. So I will probably give a little overview of this item here. So in Express, there was an issue created under the presumption of bug initially that when a request is made to Express, so say like you have app.get like /foo, right? And you do something. So you're basically saying whenever someone does a get on the /foo path name, it will do my action. Well, so probably little known to some people is that all that action in a HTTP request is on what they call, is on the first line of the HTTP request. It's text-based protocol for HTTP 1. So it's method name space essentially the thing that you want to act on, the resource URI usually, space HTTP / the version number. So usually that would be like get space /foo space HTTP 11. That would be an example for why I would invoke that. Well, potentially little known, and I looked and it wasn't clearly documented. Not a fault of documentation anyway, right? Like, it's always hard to document something, especially when it was documented after it was built, blah, 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 blah. Like, honest, just didn't know. I mean, so certainly nothing against documentation. That's why I don't know why people make a big deal about something missing from documentation. It's an honest mistake. I mean, easy to make. We didn't purposely not document something. Like trying to be malicious or whatever. So little known is that you can actually, there's different ways you can put in that status line. So there's a few other things. We'll gloss over all the other types of things you can put in the center area. But one of the things you can do also is put a full complete URL. So like with the authority. So the authority is another name for basically the host area. So you can basically say get space http //www.google.com/foo space http /11 as another thing you can have on your status line. So node.js itself will happily accept that it's a perfectly valid request. rec.url in the first case is set to literally the characters /foo. In the second case, it's actually set to the rec.url is actually http //www.google.com/foo. So the bug was saying that, wait, why is my get /foo route also invoked when the URL in that line was like a fully qualified URL? It's only looking at the path name part. So ignoring discussion yet about whether it's good or bad or what we should do I can definitely tell you that it is not a bug, and it was done like that with intent. So just that it wasn't, I can definitely claim, because I was around when that was happening, is that even though it existed in Connect for a long, long time, it came from Connect, I was around and actually made some PRs to help make that work better. So it working like that is on purpose. It's, with the design, whether or not the design is bad or not bad is what we're going to discuss, but just as a bug itself, it does do that on purpose. And part of that is because if you think about the router itself, I mean, it routes on what it knows. It routes on the method, get in that app.get example, and the path name /foo in that example. So that is one way to look at it. That's how I like to look at it, is basically that's what it routes on. What you feed it is what it will certainly do. Just like when rec.url is /foo ? bar, it doesn't not go to your get /foo route, because that's not, all you're doing is specifying the path name, basically. You're not specifying what the query string parameters are or not in that that little string there. Just like you don't specify what is or isn't the host name. So that's kind of like an overview. So what was talked about was, one, should Express, and I won't get into whether or not Express as an app should do it or the router should do it, as in whose responsibility, but we'll talk as the general Express, not saying whose duty it is versus the Express app or the router, which I'm sure Blake certainly has opinions about if we want to do anything. But should Express as a whole either not respond to those, or like probably just respond 404, being like, oh, the URL http://www.google.com/foo doesn't exist. I don't know how to handle that. I know how to handle a /foo, but not that. Should it do that? Should we throw some kind of error when it happens? That's that's the main high level one. That's kind of the primer. I certainly have other opinions about it, but I'll let Blake, who's been patiently waiting, go and say what he thinks about it here. Because he read, we had a little issue. We talked. I put words, he put words. And I think I put a lot more words than he did. So I'm sure he's been thinking about it.
Nothing major. I agree that it should be there in the end. It's just there was no documentation around it, and there was no documentation in the code either. So it wasn't clear the first time I started working on the router what the hell this block of code did. I understand it now, but that was the main thing that threw me off. I was like, what the hell is this? And I just always ignored it. But yeah, I think it should be handled. One thing that was interesting, like a behavior, was the host name. The host name seemed to, if you hit google.com with a different host name in that fully qualified URL, then it responds with 404 unless it's the host name is google.com. So the one thing that I realized that is maybe it should be configurable at all. The default is true, respond to everything, which is today.
The funny thing,
someone wants to change it.
In fact, it's funny. I think that's actually a weirdness with how Google does its edge routing. If you actually send to google.com's host another one that says http://calendar.google.com, so not www, but a different actual valid Google domain, you'll actually get the response as if you had sent it to calendar.google.com, in case you didn't actually try that one. So that's a little interesting little anecdote there, is that it seems like Google's edge routing actually not only does it look at the host header, but I think that the authoritative URL in that actual top actually overrides what you put in the host header itself. Just as an antidote for Google's edge routing. So kind of on that vein, obviously, so here's another thing, right? What I like to say a lot of this stuff is there are other people who have done, I wouldn't call us server experts. And the other thing is people who come by too, a lot of times, are not server experts either, right? There's always the problem, and I'm sure we all, I've experienced this a lot too, is following the letter of the spec and what you have to do to actually work on the internet are sometimes two different things. So for one, and I can actually mention here what the letter of the spec says for this, and then also kind of my experience with this as well, and why I even made pull requests so long ago to actually improve the support. But before I get into that, I'll go back to my previous things where I said I would never call myself an expert on servers. I'm frankly not. I like servers and I'm enthusiastic about them. Express is not a server. I would never call it such a thing per se. It's just a server layer and stuff. So, Node is the real HTTP server here, doing the parsing and all that of HTTP and marshalling of that. But one thing I think of is and I hadn't necessarily combed through the source code, is I always say to myself, I'm like, well, what does Apache do? What does Nginx do? What does Lighty do in their source code, right? Do they do anything to it? Do they not do anything to it? Blah, blah, blah. So what we did do, though, in the issue, which I will link to below, that issue is locked just because it was getting weird and that the original topic was a bug, and I asked if we should change the discussion multiple times, and it was ignored. It just continued to kind of go weird. So we can always open another issue for this if we actually want to discuss it outside of here, or delay it to the next meeting as well. So who cares? But also link to it below. So I had made, curiously, just different calls to just different servers where I tried to hit like Microsoft. I wasn't trying to hit a particular server technology. I was just assuming that I would hit different server technology. So I hit Microsoft.com, which I assumed was running on Internet Information Services. Whether or not it's directly hitting that or not, I don't know. It's not easy to tell because people disable their stupid server headers and shit. I hit like Apache's website, like Apache's HTTPD specific website, because Apache is an organization, so their HTTPD site. We hit Google.com, a few other things. Pretty much the key takeaway was behavior inconsistent. It seemed that some of them acted exactly like Express, literally did not give a crap what the authority was. It literally just served it up based on the path only is what it looked like. Exactly like Express would do. A couple of them didn't do that, but the couple that didn't do that looked like they actually were looking at that and internally routing, like that they were acting as if that authority part was the host header, for virtual hosting. Google.com was an example of that. When I set http:// doesn't exist.com/something, it would always give me 404 no matter what it was, even at the root. But if I send it to www.google.com, it would reply with the Google homepage. If I send it to calendar.google.com, it would reply with the calendar redirect page or whatever. Docs.google.com would work. So it seems like the only reason that even returned 404 is just because it was actually trying to look up the authority based on some virtual hosting rules. Not that it necessarily wasn't just saying, no, you can't have that, which was what the proposal was. So I can comment a little bit on why I had made pull requests about it. So I had personally had an origin server, so that's what the spec calls it, as an origin server. So like your Express server would be the origin server, right? It's the thing that actually serves up the thing. It's not a proxy server, so it differentiates proxy, origin. So origin server should only rather receive a request that's just get/foo, right? It shouldn't have the authority part in that URL section. That's meant for proxies, not for origin servers. So why did I even have to deal with it? Well, there are some clients, either they're buggy or something, sent the stupid host as a full authoritative URL for unknown reasons. Why, I don't know. I mean, not just blatantly not making that work would certainly, out of the box, Express would just not work with those people and you'd be like, why? I don't understand. There's also legitimate ones that I definitely knew of, as those, over the years, many proxy servers, and some of them incorrectly don't rewrite that part and send forward what they got to the origin, which then is a full, complete authority URL, which is super annoying. So that's kind of like my personal experience with it. The only times I've seen it is in those couple cases. Clearly, I feel like clearly buggy clients or proxies that are just stupid. What does the spec say? So I looked that up in the issue. The spec specifically says that an origin server must accept that fully qualified URL. It doesn't specify, though, if the origin server should somehow understand that the authority section is not it. So, like, if your Express server is on, like, happydance.com, that the spec doesn't say you should understand that the authority says google.com/foo, so since you're happydance.com, you should just forward it or something. It doesn't mention that because I think that's probably out of the realm of the protocol anyways. What I've seen is that some origin servers like Express seem to just completely ignore that, whatever's in there, and just pretend like whatever the host is what it does. Some seem to be, because of some edge routing systems, seem to understand that and actually invoke some kind of virtual host rules or something and route to different things based on that. So, I mean, that's kind of like what I saw for it. Personally, I think it should stay there. Whether or not we should actually make that configurable or granular in some way, I'm all ears. I haven't put any thoughts on it. Blanketly removing it or disabling it by default, though, seems probably not the greatest experience. It's basically like, let's make Express so strict it's like really hard to use out of the box. So you'll put something into production, it will work fine, then you'll get customers who are using some weird-ass proxy now that access your site, and you'll tell them, well, then don't use that proxy, and they'll be like, well, my government will spy on me then. So, I don't know. Blake, I don't know if you have any other thoughts here. I know I talked a lot.
No, that's about it. I mean, I'm good keeping it. Someone will have to put in the work to make it configurable. My only thought was, like, should it be configurable like the X powered by? Like, can we make it as easy as that? Like, by default it's true, but someone could set it to false or something like that. The only other thing is, like, it happens at every level on the request routing as well. Should it just be like the first Express middleware, like a part of Express itself, versus like every layer of the router?
So we mean it happens. What is the it?
Reading through the code. So this is like going back to when I first looked at it. I could be wrong by what this even does. But there is a function call in the router. Whenever you call handle, it does get proto host and like kind of like removes the proto host from it. And then, like, routes on that and then adds it back. Right.
Yeah. So I can speak a little bit to that. And so that comes from the current architecture, which is that any middleware, kind of like to support like an Apache style, if you think mod rewrite, any middleware is allowed to completely alter the URL and method on the rec. And then Express will continue routing based off the new URL. So that's why it ends up constantly taking it away and adding it back. It takes it away to do its thing, and it puts it back, so it's still preserved. I mean, because you can kind of think of, if you think of Express as an app, right, ignoring the router, which is even more independent than the app, but the app itself is also basically a router. It's a function that takes rec res next. So in a lot of ways, you would kind of expect that if you gave it a rec and res, and the Express itself didn't handle it, when it came back out the other side, you would kind of expect your rec.url to be what went in and not randomly different, ignoring you putting any code that actually changes it. Just that's how I've always felt about the router, so that's why it kind of like undoes it, if that makes sense. So that way, a 404, if you're in the 404 area, so like your last route, as long as you didn't change rec.url, if you look at rec.url, it's the exact same thing that went into the Express router from the get-go. So
it wouldn't be, would it?
Yeah, because it added it back.
As a router itself. To start with, right?
Sorry, you kind of broke out at the end, at least in mine.
Sorry, Express would have stripped it to start with because it has its own router. I would have to look at the Express source code to get back to you, but I thought at the beginning of the router for Express, it would strip it. And if you're using Express, it's not going to put it back because you would be inside Express, so that it would not be there.
So it strips it, and then, remember, that's why I talk about the difference between Express and the routers, right? So the routers, especially that router code, can technically be used in plain HTTP on top of Connect, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't have to be used in Express proper only. The actual, if it's available inside of the code and like when it's adding it back, I don't 100% remember offhand. Just remembering off just by default, as far as I know, it should be putting it back constantly before it actually hands it into your code. So the other difference is, remember, use is a little different. So what it does is it does put it on before every time it calls your route. So an example, and I was just looking at the tests to see. So, and it was kind of like how I remember. So say like you have app.use/foo, right? And normally if you do get/foo, you'd expect rec.url to be just a single slash inside of that handler because use does a path stripping feature. So what it will actually be in this case is if your original URL was http://www.google.com/foo, inside that app.use, it will actually be http://www.google.com/. So it only stripped the path portion, basically put back the original portion, is what it's doing here.
Yeah,
and that's why it's manipulating it. Yeah.
So this behavior is weird, right? Like, there's a lot of documentation on the internet that does literally like path matching and isn't stripping this stuff.
Right.
So all of that stuff, all of those middleware right now are broken. If someone
Correct.
queries
I mean, and that of course is a problem. And I know that I've always told people with middleware, first of all, don't frickin' look at rec.url, always parse the URL and look at the pieces you're looking for, right? So that's actually why we publish that parse URL module as a separate module. Because if you just use that parse URL module, especially with Express code, it literally doesn't even parse the URL again. It just pulls up a cached parse. So it's very lightweight, and usually you would want to do parse URL of rec.pathname and actually match against the path name. All the documentation where I showed out in examples, in Express.js, or I always do that with parse URL module. Yes, anybody who strictly looks at rec URL won't behave that way. And technically, that doesn't make sense. That's why I say when we talk about like the actual standards, the RFC, it's technically violating a must of the RFC. Like, at the very minimum, the RFC says if you're like happydance.com, even if it's to you're an origin server, a request to HTTP request URL. If rec.url is http://happydance.com/foo, if you handle /foo, you're actually required by the spec to still respond as if it just was /foo, which is, weird. I didn't actually know it was in the spec before, and I think that was added when they moved it to the 7000s, because I don't think it was when it was in 2616 or whatever. So,
yeah. So I mean, we've got like the one weird inconsistency, and middleware authors aren't going to realize that. Like the one I'm thinking of, like, I mean, a lot of people match internally, do a regex or something like that, accept a regex, and aren't using a full router just to do that. So all of that stuff is technically broken. So is there a way that maybe we can, because if you do a request right now, it won't hit those middlewares, but it'll hit like the other ones after it potentially. So you've got like this weird thing happening now. And I actually wasn't aware of this happening. I thought this was kind of just handled because the proto host was being stripped always. But if it's being put back, that means we've got that issue.
right.
Does it make more sense maybe that like it is like the XPowered by thing? It's just middleware at the beginning, and then everywhere through the rest of Express, it's just consistent.
So one, of course, XPowered by is not technically a middleware. So the only one that's actually an implicit middleware is the query parser, which that was fixed in Express 5. We actually don't want to normally put implicit middleware because that's kind of super annoying, because it's like, how do I remove that middleware? It's kind of weird. It ends up on your stack, something you didn't realize was there. It's just added literally like when it goes to the main app function. So like the XPowered by actually doesn't even work if you actually call direct app.handle directly and don't pass it through the main app.
I think it's fine for this to act the same as well, because I wouldn't expect every router to handle this specifically.
Right.
I would love it to be consistent. Yeah, I definitely don't want that to break.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, so like a couple things that I always think of is like, of course, anybody matching directly against rec.url has the query string problem, right? So, like, just like their path, like get/foo, like if they're doing rec.url ===/foo, obviously that would break if they're using, there's any query string at all. Like a good example is jQuery, which, if you have cache false always puts the underscore query string parameter, which will propagate all through your thing. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody directly matching on rec.ur without even parsing it has any real sane matching going on anyways. I don't know, though, 100%. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. I need to review some code. It's been a while since I even looked at this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, and this, like anything, we're not making any decisions. We're just discussing it. And we can absolutely continue to discuss all we want. That's why we have these meetings. Hooray! And we also have our issues we can talk about. So, but yeah, so my thought isn't necessarily that nothing will change, right? So that's why we're talking about it. Is also one, if we want to change something, what do we change? You know, where should we even go, right? So that's certainly a question. You know, especially when we talk about changing something that's very hard to detect, right? So, like, if you change that behavior, what would the upgrade docs look like, right? So, I don't mean that doesn't mean we can't change it, absolutely. It certainly to me, it usually means, like, we should certainly make sure that this is a good thing to change when it's hard for people to understand when their code might be now subtly broken. When it wasn't before. Obviously, one could argue their code might be subtly broken today. You know, it's just like anything. For anybody not subscribed here in the TC to all the repos, just an anecdote is that a user came and said, "Oh, I just upgraded this module and it suddenly broke my thing because it was weird and I was somehow, for some reason, relying on that weirdness." And it was like months after the new version. It was like literally 4 months after the new version published. So I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm not reverting it. Also, the fix was meant to be fixed. It wasn't an accidental thing. But then, you know, it made me think, just like that XKDCD thing about the CPU warming people up. Like, there was any bug fix. There's no technical difference between a bug fix and a breaking change, right? So any bug fix is a breaking change, and it's always hard to document those. And so what I mean by that, too, even if we put it in a major, it's just, you know, there's always people relying on both sides of the behavior. Either people didn't expect the behavior and so think the existing behavior was a bug, which is, you know, one of those reactions that we can help with documentation, though sometimes if people are surprised enough, they'll literally just still argue about that it shouldn't be there even if it was clearly documented. But then also, I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, just I guess the general sentiment is like, yes, absolutely, we want to talk about it and figure out if we should do anything and what specifically we should do something, and then, like, you know, figure that out as our plan of action. So whether or not, so of course one would say, like, so say, like, for example, someone says, "Oh, I want to be super, super strict, ignore what the RFC says, and literally, if I'm an origin server, only respond, like, I want a 400 or 404 always a non-origin URL," right? So my answer to that would be add a middleware. And if the argument is, if I add a middleware, we'll check it each time, I mean, it's like, okay, if we did it, we would literally check it each time. So you're not removing an every request check. Like, just because you don't immediately see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? So, of course, they might say, well, I have to parse the URL each time. Well, it's like, that's why we published that parse URL module, right? You would not parse it each time, and just use a cached version, so whatever. To do stuff like that. So that's always an option, right? So I'm not saying we won't change anything either, right? So I'm just talking about just in my mind, right? I want to reject it. To me, as a non-argument, you can technically reject it currently. Certainly not a blocker to your rejecting of it, just because Express doesn't do it by default, or even have little knobs to turn. Because the other thing that I like to think about is, taking functions is knobs. Like, I think there's a pull request right now. It's kind of like to some module where it's like they want to like put in super extra sugar and like just pass a function as that option, and you can do anything you want. It's like, well, yeah, I could write code, or I could just write all the code, make you maintain it, and then I can only put my sugar. You know, it's like, I guess, but we're programming here, I guess. So I don't know. That's how I sometimes think about it. So it's like adding a middleware doesn't seem to me to be a bad thing. I don't know. I guess some people don't like it. Then the other people, but then also, if Express just outright rejected it, right, no one could necessarily write a middleware that would look at that and route to different apps based on that authority in there, right? Or might sometimes reverse proxy something and sometimes not. Like that would, if Express just out of the box always rejected it, one, that wouldn't even be possible. But two, of course, we start conflicting with even interoperability with the general internet. The only good way for Express to reject those out of the box or for them out of the box would be Express would have to somehow have intimate knowledge about what is an appropriate authority to respond to. So obviously you could just say, well, if the host header matches that, then there you go. And that is a way, though then you'll still get people saying, well, if I send any random host, it responds anyways. So it's hard to say. That's why it's certainly, I feel like, in our best interest to kind of like figure out like what is the kind of like right thing to do. And part of that, and I haven't done this yet because I've been really busy, is I wanted to take a look actually at the source code of Nginx and Apache at minimum, probably Lighty as well. Just understand what that they exactly do with that case and when they're the origin server. Just so I kind of like have my, I'm sure they had debates about the same stuff. So just kind of like, what did they kind of settle on, kind of thing is how I like to picture it, which helps a lot when we're trying to figure this out as a group of non-server experts, if that makes sense. So, yep. Any thoughts that you have, Blake, or?
No, perfectly happy with the behavior. Understand how.
Totally off base, not off base. I mean, we'll keep. I put on there if you feel like you want to have a particular discussion topic, or if you want to open an issue about it in the router module, potentially, if you think it should be in the router, because that's the one that's doing all this splitting in the first place. Feel free, and we can certainly talk about it some more. I still have on my list to go check out what those servers are doing before I just forget about the issue altogether. Even if we say, sure, let's keep it how it is, I'm still really interested. Maybe I'll go look at them and be like, man, this is certainly new information. Maybe I should just note this down, and maybe that might pop up additional conversation or not. So I definitely want to do that at minimum personally. So I have that on my list to do.
So I just wanted to make sure. So Doug, you opened an issue to better document this behavior, and I'm assuming that's still.
Yeah. So one, I didn't want to write down too much yet, just because we're still talking about it. So yeah. I'm not going to make you go figure it out. I'll definitely, because one, we have to document it on the router module anyways. So I'm going to try to at least give an overview, if not even a PR of what I feel like the doc should be, is probably what I'm going to do. So yeah, I'm definitely not going to tell you to go figure it out and document it for sure. I'm going to try to put that together as a PR or something.
Okay. All right, yeah, cool. Whatever. If you want to do a PR, that's fine. Or if you just want to, paste in some text in that doc issue, that's also fine. Either way you want to do it is great. So
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I made the issue just so it wouldn't get lost. I asked the original reporter to make an issue in the doc site, but it didn't seem like that was going to happen. So I just went ahead real quick and made the issue so it didn't get lost. So that's kind of like what that was. So yeah, certainly I plan to do something, but I didn't want to to get it kind of lost. So I wanted to make the issue.
Okay.
Just so we're aware that this is a hole in our documentation and that we need to fix it. And I'm volunteering to fix it for sure.
Okay, cool. Great. All right, thanks. I actually have to drop. That was my wife calling, so I
Cool.
have to go.
All right, yep, it's been an hour and a half, so I mean, unless anybody has anything else, I think that we'll probably end this here. Blake or Linus, if you have anything else you want to talk about, I can stay on longer, so we can certainly continue, but an hour and a half is certainly a long time.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Rand.
See ya. Yeah. I'm all good. I'm going to drop off as well.
Cool. Like I said, absolutely, we can continue the conversation. I hope I'm trying. I know we talk about all this stuff, but I guess I'm not. It's hard to, I guess, articulate it. I'm not trying to specifically say no. We're not changing it. If that makes sense, it can sometimes sound like that. What I'm mainly saying is, let's make for sure we understand what we're changing, just as a general, rather than because I always find that's the hardest part is just people will come by and drive by with all kinds of random things, whether or not doing every random whim of someone makes sense is certainly whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the behavior is fine. The only reason I popped into that issue is because it was always something in the router that I was like, I don't understand how this specific section actually even works or why it's there.
Right.
So learning that helps, and having docs on that in the future, I think it solves my issue with it.
Absolutely, because like I said, that's why I made that issue in the Express website, because absolutely it is an issue that we don't have it documented. So it makes it hard, right? Not everybody comes to the source code of every module they use, so having it documented is certainly necessary. And like I said, not having it documented is an honest mistake. I mean, it's hard to document things, especially hard for people who write programs who don't want to write docs to document things. So,
it's also a very ungoogleable topic. I have no idea what you search for on Google to find information on this specific feature of routing.
Yeah, so the RFC kind of gives a little bit of wording, but yeah, when I Google it too, there's not much. I think because it's one of those things where it's kind of like the thing that just kind of works and everybody ignores, right? So that's why it's there in the first place, because it's a thing that kind of works and everybody ignores, right? So if it just blatantly rejected, I'm pretty sure that's why they have it in the RFC specifically saying it has to work, just in case for bad misbehaving clients, because if it didn't work and it rejected it, I'm sure there'd be probably a lot more people talking about, why does my thing work? It's like, oh, your client has a bug, it's sending the full URL, or using a buggy proxy. I bet you if that was more common for it not to work at all, we'd probably see more Googleable stuff about it, because people in Google, you find things that are problems.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm gonna drop off now. It's 6 here, so see you later.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
All right, I guess meeting's over then. So see you in 2 weeks, everyone.
Yeah. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.